equities have not rallied really much beyond the presidential election over in France last year. My question quite simply is why, when many people thought it would?
I think probably the most obvious explanation there, John, is the currency. I mean, again, you're talking about some of these equity indices which generate at least 50% of their revenues abroad. And obviously, with regard to the Eurozone as a whole, you are talking about a region which has got a fairly large current account surplus. And Germany's is absolutely huge. And Germany is obviously the economic engine, so carries a bit more significance. So when the euro is rallying 5, 10, 15% in a trade-weighted basis, that's going to have quite a big dampening effect on domestic earnings.
Yeah.
And that probably just keeps the equity indices from ramping higher in the way that we've potentially seen the S&P do over the previous few years.
Lisa, if you're over at the ECB, politics stable, one, Italian election coming up, granted, but at least Germany's sorted out now, so that's sorted tick. Second one, peripheral spreads are still really, really tight, so in this elevated pickup of volatility worldwide, I think if you're over at the ECB right now, you're pretty comfortable, you're not too worried.
Well, remember when we were talking about the possibility of the breakup of the Eurozone? No one's talking about that now.
No.
And in fact, this deal that Merkel struck seems to actually encourage more European unity, especially because the finance minister is going to go to the Social Democrats. And you can see that the bet in the market right now, if you take a look at this chart that I was looking at this morning of the gap between Spanish yield and German 10-year yields, you can see the gap has gone to the narrowest since 2010, basically a bet that the ECB will continue to backstop the market and that there will be some financial unity centralized in Europe.
I was speaking to someone just on Friday with short Italian debt, and it's been a bit of a pain trade for some people trying to short the periphery. And, James, it raises the question whether this story in the United States of elevated equity volatility can bleed into risk assets. Here in the US, that would mean high-yield credit. In Europe, it would mean Spain, and it would mean Italy. Can you see that? Do you see that materializing?
I mean, yes, I can. I mean, I have to be honest, the peripheral spread thing has been, really quite volatile over the last few years in terms of just quite what risk that is seen to represent. So there are times when Italian government bonds behave like duration, there are times when Italian government bonds behave like risk, and there are times when they seem to be, ignoring all incoming news and information. And certainly what we've seen in the last few days, as you describe, is that Italian yields and Italian spreads have actually ignored this volatility that we've seen in the US remarkably well. And actually, the relief trade today in BTPs has been aggressive, considering there wasn't really any weakness over the previous few days. So that suggests at the moment that there is some flow going on, which is really dampening any relationship between BTPs and other assets, a potential reassessment of the idiosyncratic risk. And maybe that is connected indeed to the news we're having out of Germany, where an SPD finance minister potentially opens the door to a more friendly stance towards some of the peripheral nations and their ability to use their budget deficits to help offset, economic drag from structural reform, if that's where we're going.